This is Ludwigshafen, Germany. For 157 years, this city has been home to BASF, the largest chemical company in the world, a symbol of German industrial dominance with around 100,000 employees and nearly $80 billion in annual revenue. But in 2022, BASF announced it was permanently shutting down large parts of its production in Germany, not because of a recession or foreign competition, but because the energy needed to run its factories cost more than the products coming out of them. And if you think the Russia-Ukraine war is the main reason behind Germany's energy crisis, which sounds logical at first, you're completely wrong, because everything traces back to one woman and one decision in March 2011. Look at this map of Germany before March 2011, 17 nuclear reactors powering Europe's largest industrial economy with cheap, stable nuclear energy, the silent foundation behind Germany's industrial dominance for decades. In March 2011, Angela Merkel announced a historic decision and shut down 8 of them in just 4 days. By 2023, all 17 were gone from the map. This decision, sold to the public under the label of a green transition, which we'll soon see it really wasn't, is now considered one of the worst in modern German history, and a key reason why Germany has been stuck in stagnation and near zero growth since 2023, with tens of thousands of businesses going bankrupt every year, and industrial giants like BASF and Volkswagen starting to move production out of the country. And all of this leads to one question: why? Why would a leader as sharp as Merkel, who guided Germany through 16 golden years and brought it to the peak of its industrial power, make a decision like this? How did it destroy Germany's most critical competitive advantage? And why do all the official explanations at the time about a green transition just not make any sense? To answer that, we need to go back to 2005. Merkel is elected chancellor, and what many would later call Germany's golden era begins. Between 2005 and 2011, German industry hit its all-time historical peak, recording the highest trade surplus in German history, with unemployment dropping to 5.5%, the lowest it had been in 27 years. German industry was unmatched anywhere in the world, and companies like Volkswagen and BASF reached the highest market valuations in their histories. At that time, Germany had 17 nuclear reactors that had been built gradually since the 1960s, supplying around 30% of the country's electricity needs at prices that were the cheapest across all of Europe. This cheap, stable energy was the silent foundation carrying the entire German economy and industrial base. But underneath all of that, something was quietly taking shape. Since the 1970s, German citizens had been raising questions about nuclear waste and long-term safety risks. And after the Chernobyl disaster in 1986, those questions turned into a genuine popular movement, out of which grew what became known as the German Green Party, which placed the elimination of nuclear energy at the very core of its political platform. Slowly but steadily, the party climbed. It reached parliament and became a force no one could ignore, and the pressure on Merkel kept building. She had been a strong supporter of nuclear energy from the start of her tenure, especially given that Germany had no real alternative, and in 2010, she extended the operating licenses of German reactors for additional years, brushing off all the pressure. Then, the disaster struck. On March 11, 2011, a magnitude 9 earthquake hit the Japanese coast and triggered a tsunami that destroyed the Fukushima nuclear plant, setting off a radiation disaster that riveted the entire world. The images were terrifying, and Japan, the technically advanced country that never makes mistakes, had collapsed in front of a global audience. In Germany, public opinion exploded, streets filled with protests, and the Green Party hit the highest polling numbers in its history within weeks. The pressure on Merkel kept mounting, especially as she sensed she was losing the public at a particularly sensitive moment, just months before elections, so she made her strange decision that would change Germany forever.
In Germany this morning, lawmakers voted overwhelmingly to shut down all the country's nuclear power plants by 2022.
She shut down 8 reactors immediately and announced a plan to phase out the remaining 9 by 2022. The official government goal at the time was a green Germany that would eliminate dangerous nuclear energy and replace it entirely with wind and solar power to reduce environmental risks and emissions. But this is exactly where things start to not make any sense. Because Germany didn't replace its clean nuclear electricity with solar or wind, as people were promised. It replaced it with Russian gas and coal as its primary sources, both of which are dozens of times worse for the environment in terms of emissions compared to clean nuclear electricity. And when that still wasn't enough, Germany had to start importing part of its power from the very nuclear reactors in France that it had spent years calling an environmental threat. So, where is the logic in abandoning nuclear energy for environmental reasons if there was no immediate capacity to replace it with renewables, only to switch to energy sources that are far worse for the environment and far more expensive? But what's even more absurd than all of that is that these sources were neither sustainable or guaranteed, and they created a dangerously serious problem: energy dependency on a country that Europe considers its #1 enemy. During the very same period when the reactors were being switched off, Germany was signing contracts for Nord Stream 2, the pipeline designed to pump Russian gas directly into the heart of Europe. At peak dependency, Germany was importing between 40% and 65% of its energy needs from Russia. A country that had once owned some of the cleanest and cheapest power generation in the world was now writing checks to its own strategic adversary in exchange for gas. And despite how strange this decision looks today, Merkel at the time believed Russian gas was an excellent cheap temporary alternative while Germany worked toward full reliance on renewables, a transition that could take decades to complete. But she decided that appeasing the public mattered more, especially after losing the Baden-Württemberg state election on March 27, 2011 to the Green Party, which pushed her to shut down the 8 reactors just 18 days later on April 15th. But this emotional shift, which had nothing to do with protecting the environment, ended up indirectly funding Russia's ability to wage wars, which is exactly what happened in Ukraine in 2022. And this is precisely where the flaws of that fateful decision became impossible to ignore. When the nuclear plants closed, German energy prices rose significantly between 2011 and 2022. But because Russian gas was still available at low cost, companies managed to absorb the increases and adapt. Until the war broke out in 2022, the last reactors shut down in 2023, and every weakness that Russian gas had been masking suddenly surfaced. Factories that had operated with competitive cost structures found themselves facing energy bills that threatened their very survival. Chemical companies, which depend on cheap energy the way a bakery depends on flour, were hit hardest of all. BASF in Ludwigshafen, where we started, consumed as much energy every day as an entire mid-sized city. When costs doubled, it could no longer compete against its own facilities in the United States or Asia, so it left. Volkswagen, a symbol of German industry for generations, announced the closure of domestic factories for the first time in its entire history, with plans to lay off tens of thousands of workers, something that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. And since 2022, Germany has lost around 200,000 industrial jobs, more than 50 major factories, and tens of thousands of companies going bankrupt every year. Now, you could argue that it's unfair to blame everything on a single decision, because Germany has many serious problems today: an aging population, declining birth rates that even large-scale immigration hasn't solved, and China transforming from Germany's largest car importer into a direct competitor, costing German companies a major share of the global market. But even so, if we do a simple comparison with France, we find a country facing the same birth rate problems and the same trade deficit with China, yet the biggest difference is that France generates 65% of its energy from nuclear reactors, which has allowed it to maintain some of the most stable and cheapest electricity prices in Europe. France wasn't affected by the energy crisis from the war and has achieved continuous economic growth from 2022 to today, while Germany is still trapped in its recession. And what makes it almost darkly funny is that Germany now imports part of its electricity from France's nuclear reactors, the very ones it considers an environmental hazard. And to think that all of this suffering came from a single decision made in 4 days, with no deep feasibility studies, no real parliamentary debate, and no ready alternative waiting in the wings, it raises a question that goes far beyond Germany. How can modern democracies allow short-term political pressure and emotional reactions to reshape entire economic models in ways that make no sense years later?